Chapter 16. Government spends, collects, and owes. Why it's important. Who owns national parks and museums? How are tax dollars and your high school related? This chapter will explain why the government collects tax dollars from you and what it spends those funds on. The United States is not a pure market economy. In addition to the market forces of supply and demand, other forces affect the distribution of resources throughout the economy. The government is one of the most important of these forces. In this section, you'll learn that the government at every level, local, state, and federal, is involved in almost every aspect of the United States economy. In 1956, the Federal Aid Highway Act and the Highway Revenue Act gave the government the authority to raise funds for the development of the U.S. interstate highway system. To raise this revenue, the government instituted a federal gasoline tax and road tolls. How predominant is the government in the United States economic system? What are the three levels of government, and how can they impact the economic choices in a market economy? Government growth. The number of government workers and functions has increased dramatically. Public works projects are public facilities that are built and paid for with tax dollars. And here you have a look at government consumption, expenditures, and gross investment over a period from 1965 up through 2003. And you can see things stayed fairly level, slight increase, especially state and local, up until the mid to late 90s. And that's where we begin to see things really spike, especially on the federal and the state level, or I should say, actually no, the federal level. You can see where it really spiked, and that affects the total here. Government purchases of goods and services, excluding Social Security and other welfare payments and interest, corrected for inflation, show an increase in all levels of government spending. Why has government grown? During the Depression, more government services were needed. Financing World War II caused more government growth. The country's increasing wealth may have led to demands for evening out inequities through more government services. Total government purchases represent 18% of GDP, and all government spending is more than 1/3 of GDP. Why has government grown? Government spending includes services to people paid for by their taxes. The true size of government may be greater than most estimates because of required private sector spending. Whether the growth of government is good or bad is unknown, but keep in mind opportunity cost and the displacement of private economic decision making. Figure 16.3, government spending as a percentage of GDP. You can see the total government expenditures, including Social Security and other welfare payments, as well as interest payments expressed as a percentage of GDP, have grown from 1965 to the present. The general purpose of government in the United States is to protect individual rights, to promote a stable legal environment for economic activity, and to promote policies that support the general well-being of all citizens. In this section, you'll learn that the government tries to accomplish this purpose in 4 ways: providing public goods, redistributing income, regulating economic activity, and ensuring economic stability. The earliest public parks were built for Persian kings who used them for hunting. Later, these parks became riding paths. Some early parks were designed from the public squares of ancient Greece, where people exercised, had social discourse, and enjoyed art galleries and sculptures. Why are parks an example of a public good? Besides providing public goods, in what other three ways do governments support the well-being of all citizens? Public goods are special goods or services provided by the government. National defense is one of the few public goods only provided by the national government. The most important public good provided only by the government is a sound system of property rights. Merit goods are those considered to be socially desirable by government leaders. Sometimes the government will subsidize merit goods so that all citizens can enjoy them. Demerit goods are those considered to be socially undesirable, and they're often taxed, regulated, or prohibited. For example, cigarettes are heavily taxed because they are considered to be a demerit good. Illegal drugs, of course, are prohibited because they're considered to be undesirable. Redistributing income. Income distribution is to use tax money to help people in need. Social insurance programs are specifically geared to help retired people, disabled veterans, and unemployed workers and their families. Social Security and workers' compensation are examples. Public assistance programs, or welfare, help people based on their needs regardless of whether a person paid taxes into the program. And here's a look at government regulatory functions. The government is responsible for protecting consumers, promoting competition, reducing the negative byproducts of the production process, and supervising labor and management relations. Governments try to ensure economic stability by smoothing the ups and downs in the overall economy so that people do not feel the harmful effects of economic shifts. Critics feel public goods should be provided by private organizations. If people pay less tax, they can use that money to choose which goods they want. Redistribution programs discourage personal progress, incentives, and self-development. Government regulations raise the prices of goods and services. Seek market solutions instead. To carry out all of its functions, governments must spend huge sums of money. As a result, the federal budget is huge and has numerous categories. Because all resources are scarce, an increase in spending in one area will cause a decrease in spending in some other area. In this section, you'll learn how the government prepares its budget and decides where to spend its funds. Social Security first began in 1935 during the Great Depression. By about 2010, more money goes out in benefits than comes in as revenue. This deficit will be covered by the surplus in Social Security, but only until about 2032, when the trust will be bankrupt. How might an increase in spending on Social Security affect the federal budget? What kinds of budgetary decisions will the government have to make between now and 2032? The federal budget is prepared about 18 months before the fiscal year. The President and the Office of Management and Budget, or OMB, work together to outline a budget plan. The President approves a budget and then submits it to Congress. Congress then examines and discusses the budget and should pass it before the coming fiscal year. Often the budget is not passed until after the fiscal year has already begun. The largest category in state and local budgets is education. Other large categories include public assistance, hospitals, health maintenance, and highways. Figure 16.6, Part A, spending by the federal government in billions of dollars. So you can see at the federal level, 48.6% is taken by income security, Social Security, and Medicare. National defense is 16%, 8.7% is interest, health, 9.5%, other 7.2%, education, training, employment, and social services 3.5%, veterans 2.5%, and transportation 3%. And here's a look at state and local government dollars. And so you can see on this graph, the largest category is intergovernmental, followed by other, then public welfare, then education, and then it goes down from there. Deficit spending and the national debt. Budget deficits are created when the government spends more than its revenues. In order to make up the difference in funds, the government borrows money, known as deficit spending. The government borrows money by selling securities. The national debt is the total amount of money the federal government owes. A budget surplus occurs when the government spends less than its revenues. Here's an example of how the national debt has piled up. And when you look at this graph, this takes us back to the year 1982, I think. No. Well, yeah, it is 1982. You can see pretty steady throughout the 1980s up through the year 2000, but you can see, and it kind of hits its lowest point in 2001 and then picks up in 2002, again in 2003, 2004, 2005, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, all the way through 2012. We can see it continued to grow at a much higher rate. The American taxpayer is the source of most of the money the government spends. Almost all federal, state, and local government revenue comes from taxes. In this section, you'll learn about the major kinds of taxes paid in this country. In 2002, the state of Colorado had the lowest sales tax rate at 2.9%. The state of Mississippi and Rhode Island had the highest at 7%. What are the principles of taxation? How can taxes be used to direct economic activity? Principles of taxation. Benefits received principle states that people who use a service should support it with their taxes in proportion to the benefit that they receive. Taxes on gasoline, for example, would largely be considered to be this type of tax of benefits received, because in theory, the more money people spend on gasoline, the more driving they're likely doing, and a lot of that money goes to support road work. Ability to pay principle states that people support programs based on their incomes, not their usage of the programs. So those are the two principles of taxation. The benefits received, which means you pay in proportion to the benefits you get, or the ability to pay, which means you pay based upon your ability to pay. Now let's look at the forms of taxation. Actual taxes are classified according to the effect they have on those who are taxed. Proportional taxes are based on a proportion or a percentage of a person's income. So if you're taxed a flat percentage, that would be proportional. Progressive taxes are taxed where a person pays a higher percentage of income in taxes as the income rises. For example, our federal income tax system is supposed to be a progressive tax system. As your income rises, you move into a higher tax bracket where you're taxed at a higher rate. Regressive taxes are taxes where a person pays a lower percentage of income in taxes as that income rises. Now, regressive tax is going to hit people who with less income harder. An example of that would be any tax that is for a flat dollar amount. It's going to be more expensive on people with a lower income in terms of being representative of their income.